I just want to put out a little quick basic information. I'm not going to really make a lot of charts and graphs here. I'm just going to tell you some other things besides what's on this funky chart I'm showing you here. Um, the blue line represents the top bracket percentage-wise for taxes. That's what the blue line represents, and you got a time period going from 1913 to 2016. So we got our income tax was first passed in 1913 with the income 16th Amendment to the Constitution, and it had to be passed. And I'm going to bring up what's going on, the connection between wars and taxes, and it's going to bring about in a real small summary exactly what's going on, because I know there's always conspiracy things about the banksters, the Rothschilds, and all this other stuff, but this really lays it out to you. So prior to 1913, we didn't have a direct taxation on income because it was declared unconstitutional back in, I think it was the 1800s. They had to drop it. Prior to the Civil War or the war between the states or the War of Northern Aggression, taxes in this country are mainly paid for by tariffs, which the tariff on cotton was the providing between 70 to 85% of the revenue on any given year, depending on what the tax rate was at that particular year, since the inception of this country. And that was the major sore point between the states, why the states seceded in the South, because they were paying. There was a big tariff increase again of 235% increase on tariffs on cotton from 20% to 47%, which would have been 235% increase. Now, but that was how money was collected. The direct taxation of income came into play under Abe Lincoln originally, and he needed to do that to finance his war of Northern Aggression, right? That's what the deal was. Later on, that was declared unconstitutional because it's a direct taxation on income. The Supreme Court said the Constitution forbids that. So it's like confiscation of wealth at a direct level. You can't do that. So that's why they passed the 16th Amendment. And I don't know if people notice or not, but it was really the money powers wanted this. It was advertised as it will soak the rich, but the money powers wanted it. So it started out in 1913 at a tax bracket of 1% of income between $0 and $20,000. So I'm just doing this from rote memory. I'm not running a script here or nothing. But back in 1913, you could buy a pretty damn good house for $2,000. So nobody really made $20,000 a year. So your tax was 1%, and often transactions were done under the table, cash basis. A lot of people were avoiding paying the tax anyway because they worked for cash. There was also no complicated tax code at that time. There was no head of household filing jointly, all these deductions. You just paid the 1%. That was it. You're done. Now, before 1913, there was already set up the Triple Détente Alliance, I think it was, where you had the UK, Russia, and Italy, and France, and then you had, I don't know, I forgot, who was on it. It was Germany and Ottoman Empire, I believe, or something, and Austria. They already had these alliances, and when the assassination came about in 1914, that set off, that was the excuse. But I really think all this was well pre-planned to be set in motion before World War I came in 1914. I think they knew this way beforehand, because it was actually King Edward VII in the UK who set up these alliances. He was fluent in French, Italian, and Russian, and his diplomacy actually made these alliances between the UK, Russia, France, and Italy. So this was all well known and ahead of time. I don't know if he was part of any master plan, but and by the way, that is my God. It sounds crazy for me to say this, but that he is my great great grandfather, because my great grandfather's his illegitimate son back in born 1865. So that was when King Edward was a young duke way back when. But anyway, that's just a little tidbit I want to throw out there because it almost feels like I'm talking about my own kin here. But it's what the hell it is. Doesn't mean nothing. Doesn't give me any special title. It didn't give my great grandfather a special title either. But that's the way it works out because he was a Roman Catholic. So you know how that goes. But Church of England, Roman Catholic. But I digress. So here you look at this chart and just point a mouse around here a little bit. What happens as soon as World War I erupts? The taxes go right through the roof. And what's interesting is this is the only time I've seen this happen in history. The capital gains tax and the income tax, direct taxation on income, skyrocket at the same rate. So in other words, the government really had no concept of let's not tax capital because that puts the brakes on the economy. As much as personal taxes, both were at a skyrocket, I think, to 77% during World War I. But you have to remember this: prices of commodities went right through the roof in World War I, and also anybody with serious wealth already had their money well protected in tax exempt foundations. So they weren't subject to this. This was actually designed to keep anybody new getting into the upper stratosphere of the wealthy that control this country. That's really what it was about. But notice what happens not only now I'm showing only the top tier taxation rate, but also the bottom tier taxation rate, now it's not as extreme as this, went up during World War I. In other words, when Dwight Eisenhower was talking about the military-industrial complex, it was already well in play immediately in World War I. Now, what I'm bringing this out for is if we ever have another major conflict, count on the government not to be losing any share of money. Now, this also goes for not only conflicts, but also economic downturns. Now, if you look at this chart here, this line here is actually 1935. So in 1932 or 30, the income tax bracket already started to go. It went way the hell up as soon as the market crashed. They decided to tax people more. So government policies caused the Great Depression to be far deeper and more severe by them putting a much higher rate. Now, I know this is the upper tier limit. This is the upper bracket, but I'm only showing that. But it was across the board that they actually taxed at a higher rate than prior to the market crash of 1929. Now, if you look later on, actually, for $200,000 income and above, now this is talking 1945, this tax rate was 94%. Now, by that time, I think deductions were coming into play, and like I said, even in 1945, you can buy a very good house for under $3,000. As a matter of fact, during the 1930s, wages were very, very low because we were experiencing a contraction of the money supply, and the price of goods was actually going down. There was no inflation in this country in 1930s. Actually, the goods were going down. But you know what also happened? I mentioned this on other videos. Now, this is, I'm just showing the upper tier of the capital gains tax in red, and the upper bracket in for the income taxes in blue. Now, the capital gains taxes are, there's not as many brackets involved in that, but as far as the income tax, there's a lot more brackets, but still, the lowest bracket all rose during these times of the Great Depression, World War I, and World War II. Even the people that made the least amount of money were taxed at a higher rate, which tells you this is why some of the stuff it's not like it has to happen this way, but I can tell you one thing. If the government just went the hell away, if there was ever an economic downturn, which we always have ups and downs and cycles, it's just a normal thing. Well, it's like breathing in and out air, The markets blow up a little bit, they expand, and then sometimes they get too far ahead of themselves and they readjust. That's a normal cycle. But when the government says we got to keep our money, and they start taxing capital gains at higher rates, and they start taxing income at higher rates, not just trying to get more, because they realize there's less economic activity going on. Let's make sure our share doesn't go down. In other words, the government doesn't want their share to go down. Now, during wartime, they're spending so much money on the war machine, they need to have the tax rate go sky high. Now, what also happened, I mentioned this in other videos, but there was no state income taxes in this country until the early 1930s. I think one state, West Virginia, had some minor state income tax in the late 20s or something, but it wasn't much, and I think it was pretty much ignored, but that's exception to the rule. But 14 states got on board with a state income tax in the early 1930s. Why did that happen? Because the governments in the states had to survive. They didn't give a rat's ass about the people. If I don't want to put it that way, I don't know how to put it. They didn't give a damn about the people. And this is really the whole main problem with the United States, really. We got this is the death knell of the United States right here. It's not like it has to happen, or it's doom and gloom, or it's like, oh, I'm just painting a bad picture. This is what causes it to happen. It's like you're bleeding the productivity of the people dry, and they don't even have enough funds or capital to reinvest because the leeches in government are taking it. But beyond that, you got to look past the government, because why is government policy being directed this way? It's not really necessarily the people in the government that are benefiting by this as much as the banks that lend to the government, and also the big businesses, the military-industrial complex, if you want to call it that actually produce goods that are used for the war machine. So, what's going on. The elitists on the top, they got it all figured out, man. And it's amazing, I look at the alternative media somewhat. Now, a lot of times I'm getting sick of looking at them, because I see the headlines and I see the garbage they say, and it's somewhat true. But what I'm telling you here, just looking back historically, you could see exactly what the problem is. They punish productivity, and they set us up in wars and depressions. And as soon as that happens, there's a war or depression, and it's almost like this is the time people they really need to have the most tax breaks during, let's say, an economic depression. You really want to cut taxes. Okay, so the governments go under. Well, fine. Because actually, if we can just, the concept of government, I guess you need a little bit of it, right? But it doesn't create wealth. It regulates certain things, like it also has laws that it's supposed to enforce to protect our individual liberties that are God given to us too. But it's not something that creates wealth. And a lot of people think, well, if the government's going to bill us out. It sounds like, because when people are used to this, the nanny state, they don't realize how much the nanny state, where the government coming in and trying to fix the economy, actually screws it up. Like, if the government taxes the crap out of people and they say, we're going to take this money, we're going to build a dam someplace or whatever, which that might be a little bit better, more constructive use than some of the stuff they're doing today. Like, they might be studying the environmental movements of turtles or something across the desert with the money that you tax the crap out of you with. But say they were going to make something concrete. There's absolutely no way the government's going to do that more efficiently than a private enterprise. That's just how it is. Now, you also add to this, I mentioned in another video, in 1932, they passed the gasoline tax. The reason they passed the gasoline tax was to pad the revenue coming into the government, because the economy slowed down so damn bad that the government's coffers are running low, right? So they passed the gasoline tax in 1932. Now, at that time, not too many people were even driving cars. It was pretty expensive to own a car. But you got to remember, all transportation of goods requires gasoline. Things are being trucked, and actually, all farm machinery and that harvests the products and tills the soil and whatever, I don't know, grinds up the wheat or takes the hail bays out to the cows or whatever, requires fuel. Well, they taxed that fuel, which caused, the transportation of goods to go up higher, which, drove up manufacturing costs, because, goods were coming into factories, some of them by truck, and they were going out to retail outlets by truck, and it caused the food price to go up, because producing food is a pretty energy intensive endeavor. And at the same time, this is when Prohibition was going on. Prohibition was actually funded by John D. Rockefeller to stop the competition for fuel. His fuel was gasoline being sold through Standard Oil in the cities, and his main competitor was the alcohol being sold by farmers out in the rural areas, where you could fill up your Model T with, and not buy John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil gasoline product. You can go to the farmer. He didn't like that, so to get them knocked out of the loop as a competitor, he funded some very religious groups that were advocating the ban of the sale and the manufacture of alcohol in this country, on religious grounds, that it was causing the breakup of the family and moral decay and all this kind of stuff. But Rockefeller wasn't interested in that part. That was his cover story. His real goal was to stop the competition of his gasoline product from the farmers. So you got to remember, when the government taxed fuel, gasoline, you had no choice. You had to buy the stuff from Standard Oil, and you had to pay the tax. You couldn't make your own alcohol because that was illegal by the Prohibition Amendment. You wonder why the Great Depression was really the really bad Great Depression. You could see why. And with a lot of this money they got, they did not use it to bail out and shore up the banks that were going under, where people lost all their savings. Only certain banks that were connected to Wall Street. And then, of course, you see all these tax rates going way the hell up during the 1930s. I don't know if you can read this chart, but under the word, this peak right here, that's 1945. That's the 94% upper tax bracket on 200,000 income. Now nobody's really making that back then, but still, all the tax brackets went up during the war, World War II. And another thing, okay, so they go back down a little bit, and then they go back up, and this was all during Eisenhower's time. Believe it or not, all this crap. This straight line up here, where it looks like a plateau, that was during Eisenhower's time. And, you know, the war in Vietnam starts kicking in. You see the tax rates going lower. But what's going on? What's going on as the tax rates finally start dropping down? The U.S. government's going in more and more debt. The surplus is being eaten up. And now the United States is the greatest, has the most debt of any nation ever accumulated in the entire world. Because our spending is actually per capita in real dollars is much higher than it was today than it was in 1944 or 45 during the height of the World War II. It's all being funded by debt. So, I just telling you some facts I know off the top of my head without really putting this together in a formal sense. Just want to talk off the cuff here. Even though I kind of do dislike a lot of the drama people on the alternative media talking about the doom and gloom. But what I'm telling you is reality. Even this guy Mark Farber, I'm not even too much of a fan of his too really, but I remember him saying that we never really addressed the underlying issues when we had the recovery since the last recession of 2008, 2009. Well, he's absolutely correct. And he fears that, and I'm going to tell you, it's my opinion too, we're going to have a much bigger recession by far than we had in 2008, 2009. And what I think they're going to do is they're going to have it happen during the Trump administration. Because what was his campaign slogan? I'm not knocking Trump. I'm not saying anything bad here about him. And I'm not saying it's... I know what they're going to blame it on because he pulled us out of Trans-Pacific Partnership. He's renegotiating NAFTA and all this kind of stuff. They're going to say that. He's setting up trade barriers with China. I know what they're going to do. I could. It's like... It's so predictable. It's simple. But when I'm putting out some of these more common sense tips to probably save you a couple bucks on my channel, I don't know how good they are. Some people find some of them more useful than others, and not everything's for everybody. But I'm telling you honestly, we got some crap coming up that it's not going to be cool. There's no doubt about this. It's not a conspiracy theory. This is not drama. The end is near. I'm telling you, man, this stuff is flat out real. And I'll repeat it again. In times of war, in other words, they set this whole freaking World War I was planned years before it happened. The alliances were already in place. All they needed was the Archduke got assassinated, and that's it. Hey, that's what did it. That's what they tell you in the textbook. That's not really what did it. This was already set in place. There's a financial incentive by some people. Obviously, you all know this maybe. Some people do benefit a lot by wars. The people that sell the products. And actually, Smedley Butler, the Marine Corps general, the one that had two Medals of Honor, said this himself. He was flat out honest about it, that the big guys, they're always calling for the wars because they know they're going to make more money on it. Maybe they're selling copper, or they're selling the machinery, or they're selling something, or munitions, or whatever. They're making money. That's really what it is. And you got to get the public all freaking geared up. And what happens is somebody just makes a slew of money off of this. That's all that happens. And these wars know no color, age, or ethnic background, or religious background. It just nails everybody that's in a 99% on a that's not in the upper echelon. And the upper echelon just gets more wealthy. And like I could say the government this, the government that, but the government becomes a tool of the elite. The government takes more taxes so they can pay for interest on more debt, for more loans to finance the war, and the government also has to buy products for the war machine. So a lot of people knew what was going on after World War One, and it was the age of normalcy was supposedly coming around again, and things never really got back to the way they were before World War One, because that evil income tax was still there. See, once they set a rule in place, it's like you can adjust the numbers. Once you set that concept in place, forget it. That's why I'm vehemently against giving up any kind of freedoms. Period. Now, when the Great Depression started hitting, you could see that's where the taxes, in 29, taxes went way the hell up. That's the reaction. Oh, the government needs their money. Screw everybody else. We got to have ours. And, of course, World War II, that was World War II was on a drawing board way before it actually happened. I'll drop another hint here. Probably you won't hear this. I said it on my channel, but it's probably buried in some video, some other video somewhere. You heard of the United Nations, of course. And a lot of people think the United Nations came about in 1947. No. The United Nations was on the drawing boards back in the 1930s. You see, World War I, part of its goal by the elitists was to push all nations to get on board with the League of Nations and sign on to something that could be a stepping stone for a world government. Well, the Senate in the United States didn't sign on with the League of Nations because they realized that the treaty-making powers of the League of Nations could become the law of the land and supersede the Constitution, so they didn't sign on with it. Now, in the 1930s, there's thinking they already had this United Nations organization on the drawing board. And here's the proof is this, and I'm not going to show you the page off the magazine, but if you look at the January 1942 edition of National Geographic, which was printed in December 1941 and hit the newsstands in 1942, it was printed only a few weeks after Pearl Harbor. They were referring to the Allied forces as the United Nations Organization forces. In other words, the World War II, part of the main reason for it was to make certain, besides making a lot of money, the banks making a lot of money on the interest, some people getting filthy rich off the war, but also to make certain that the United States would be softened up enough to get involved in, a world governing body, more or less, through the United Nations. Now, of course, the way it turned out was that the United Nations was mainly us, the United States. And if the United States is in there, the United Nations wouldn't exist. But look what's going on with this chart as we go along. Taxation rates are going lower and lower and lower. People are thinking, well, that's better for the economy. But why? How is the United States being destroyed silently through debt? Our spending is actually per capita and in real dollars is higher in this nation today than it was in World War II. But our taxation rate is dropped off real hot low here. That's because it's all fueled with debt. What happens when the United States, the day of reckoning was probably very close. I don't know how much longer, because it seemed like the day of reckoning's been close for 10 years now. But they're patient. When the day of reckoning comes, the United States is actually, the standard of living in the United States is going to go way down, and the United States is not going to be able to fund all the military expenditures of the United Nations, and then it's going to be more an equal playing field. And guess what? Then that global power, the United Nations, or maybe the one that's going to succeed it later after maybe a World War III, is going to have a lot more clout in this country. People used to sit back and say, well, without us, the United Nations is nothing, so why worry about it? Well, once this debt bomb hits us, and you know what will happen if the debt bomb hits us, the immediate reaction from the government, which is actually the elitists behind the government, is will be raising taxes on both capital and personal income, which will put the brakes on the economy even more and make people even more poor, where they can't fight back what's going on in the government because it'll all be controlled by the elitists and the big money. Now, maybe it is doom and gloom, but I'm trying to provide some small, real solutions here to get around some of this crap, because it's just like everything. Give an example. A lot of times in military strategy, if you go back ancient Rome, on the Iberian Peninsula, for instance, in Spain, there was a tribe up there, the Iberian tribe, I think it was at that time. And they were very difficult to, get in line because they lived up in the mountains and all this type of stuff. But through perseverance, the Roman army actually redirected an entire river and directed the river away from where the Iberians were. And they totally surrounded their cities with walls and barricades and pikes and whatever in the ground. And they basically starved them out for months and months and months. I think it was a couple of years, until they were weakened sufficiently till they broke. And they were able to conquer these mountain people who were very tough, independent, and hardy. Now, you might think, well, that's what the government's doing to us, but you, in turn, can do that back to the government. You can do this to the elitists. Don't think that every little effort you make doesn't have some kind of impact. A small effort, like an individual legionnaire, a soldier, century, whatever they call those guys back then, I forgot now, with a shovel, taking out a scoop of earth to divert a river, is nothing. But when you combine all the efforts of all the cohorts and the legions doing a coordinated plan, it does make a huge difference. And the organization of that plan brings down the enemy. That's actually the goal. It's not so much that I want to bring down the government per se, but government needs to get smaller but not destroyed. But really what needs to get destroyed is that upper 1 basis point of 1 basis point that I've been playing these shrewd games against us. Now, I can also say this, which doesn't mean a damn thing. Allegedly, now I know my great-great-grandfather was the illegitimate son of Duke Albert Edward, who later became Edward VII. Allegedly, and I know this story with that. I've known this for a while, and I researched it deeply, and it looks very legit. Although I don't have birth certificates, and one day I might get DNA evidence, which will be something. But Lord Greg Hallett says that the father of Duke Albert Edward was actually not Nathan Lionel Rothschild. I can somewhat believe that because my great-grandfather, that's who it was, my mother's grandfather, my great-grandfather, accumulated a lot of wealth. So his grandfather would have been Nathan Lionel Rothschild. I think he just had it in him, in his DNA. I don't know how he accumulated so much wealth, but he owned a whole city block in Bayonne. But, and he started out as an illiterate guy. I don't know how he did it, from Italy. So he's probably had it in him. He's had that business acumen in him. There's no doubt about it, whether he had formal training or not. But honestly, I think some of my background, not that I've accumulated a lot of wealth, but I've been around people that I have, and I've been around the shrewdest of the shrewdest, and I've been their main accountant. Um, I think I got a handle on what the hell's going on here, very much so. Um, there's some pretty. I don't want to put the doom and gloom out here like it's hopeless and shit, but it's if you don't you just sit on your ass and you freaking think, it'll take care of it. I'll worry about it when it happens later. It's gonna bite you in the ass, and there's nothing you can do about it. So one of the things is, I know there's a lot of good channels out there about prepping and stuff and taking care of business and all that kind of stuff. And I think those kind of channels are probably a lot better than just the ones that are screaming about doom and gloom. But I gave you another angle here about how the government, which is actually the elitists, they're using the government as a tool of them, will raise taxes on both personal income and capital gains to keep their rackets going against us. That'll keep the elitist rackets going. The interest from the banks, and they got it all set up because when this debt bomb explodes, and it's gonna explode. Like the only reason we're seeing these lower tax rates over the last so many decades, it's all being fueled by debt. The spending is worse than World War II per capita in real dollars. We should be at like the upper tax bracket should be 100%, whatever, 110%, 100% plus take out a loan to pay the rest of the taxes you owe that you don't even have the money. I mean, that's how bad it is with the debt. And when the debt explodes, the United States is going to be a cog in the wheel of a global government. But I always think there's an angle you can get away around it. But if you know what's coming up, at least you know. At least you know. Hey, there's a brick wall coming up. We got to find a way to get around this shit. Okay, and that's exactly my point. So I'm giving you reality, not doom and gloom. And one of my things always when I work for these guys that had some serious freaking buckaroos, right? They always liked the way I was. I was like plain common sense. I could break down a complex problem into simple logic without throwing the $500 words in it. And I was very honest, even when they smacked me down for being too damn honest. And people used to sometimes call me Columbo because I had this simple way of saying things, and it was a little deceptive, but I really understood the problem, and I'd come up with a solution. And I think the solution is this, if in a nutshell, money itself is not really the solution. You got to have the stuff to survive. You got to remember, think of yourself almost like on a desert island. If if you had piles of gold on a desert island, would it do you as good as having piles of coconuts and palm trees that produce the coconuts? No, the gold wouldn't do you shit, right? Wouldn't do you any good. That's the way you're going to survive, and that's probably the way to stop the elitists because they might not tax coconuts. If you got stored up food, you got ways to produce energy on your own with solar panels, and you got ways to get water on your own without going through the city, you might be okay for quite a while. And, maybe the elitists aren't going to like that, but too bad. So, just want to put this out. It's kind of like a hodgepodge of different things in this update, but it does explain not just with the income tax, not just with the capital gains tax, but also with the sales tax, the government regulation, the new fees on the regulations that they come about, the state income tax, which is another one, besides the state sales tax and the gasoline tax, and all the regulatory fees from the EPA, right? So, I really would love the government to collapse, to tell you the truth. I really do. I don't really know what the hell they do exactly, you know. So, but be prepared because, I'm not trying to scare people, but I really do think I got this dead on balls accurate that this is coming down, and there ain't going to be a damn thing that anybody's going to be able to do to stop it. And it might be coming down during the Trump administration, or at least starting, because I think they're going to do everything they can in power, the ones that are in power, to make his campaign promise, make America great again, be like a major dud. And we've already had, the typical 7 or 8 year cycle when it's supposed to be the next recession. They pushed that past the election, and I think it's, probably going to be starting here pretty soon. I don't know. So just to give you a warning, not trying to freaking scare anybody or nothing, but I'm telling you, man. And like I said, if you can have all the money in the world, you gotta really have the stuff. An example of this is too, even with food. When the barbarians surrounded Rome, people who were loaded with gold, they would trade all the gold in the world they had for the lousiest, coarsest, moldy bread just because they were starving. You almost got to think like you're on a desert island. Just keep your essentials that you need for yourself and have enough of them on hand, or else you're going to be SOL. And that's that. And if you do that, you know it'll be a lot better than what not doing it. That's for sure.